Hoops through life. Hoops through life.
Welcome to another episode of Hoops Through Life, a podcast where we discuss everything related to women's basketball player development, the collegiate recruiting process, and transition from high school to college. I'm your host, Elsbeth Bierman. Our guest today is Coach Steve Limberiou. Steve played basketball for 4 years at Catholic University. He is currently the Peters Township head girls basketball coach, notching a 56-18 record with 2 section titles as a head coach in 3 years. He has helped develop and assist young women through the recruiting process, his players playing at all NCAA Division levels. Steve, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on.
And so I know based on our previous unrecorded conversation, I know that you have a lot to offer this audience, and I want to make sure just that the information is clear and efficient. So I figured the best way to structure it would just kind of move chronologically. So entering high school, club and AAU, skill development, and then the recruiting process. So I'll just kick us off. How can a middle school student best prepare for high school basketball?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to do as far as the recruiting process is to assess what your goals are. And I think this is something that's important as you head into high school from the middle school age. I think you need to determine, are you someone who really wants to take this seriously and you have aspirations to be a scholarship athlete? Or are you someone who just views this as more of a fun activity where you'd consider playing in college, but you're not totally sure on it? I think that's the first thing. And I think getting the answer to that will shape the rest of your decisions. And then on top of it, I think it's important to have some type of skill training, whether that be someone that's related to your school or your school district that you live in, or an outside trainer, someone that's getting you ready to play basketball at the high school level. I think is really important, and kind of to have that mentor, someone who's been through it ideally or has experience that can lead you and get you ready. Those to me are the 2 important steps as you get ready to play in high school.
Yeah. So kind of with that, but what questions should parents and the athletes, but I feel like at this age, it might mostly be parents, but what questions should they be considering when choosing that AAU or club program, or maybe even a trainer?
Yeah, so as far as the AAU thing, like I said, it goes back to first, finding what your goals are, and then I think the next important thing is finding how that AU program fits. So I think it's important, if your aspirations are to play, scholarship basketball, whether that be Division 1 or 2, is asking each AU program whether they're on a shoe circuit. And what I mean by a shoe circuit is Nike, Adidas, or Under Armour. There's also the Select 40 and Elite 40 leagues. Asking the director or whoever you're speaking with whether they are on one of those circuits. And I think that's something that's really important, because those are, for the most part, where the college coaches are. So I think it's important to know that they are in one of those programs to get you set up. I think the next most important thing is positionally, how your position, how does your AU program view you as a player, and what position they plan on playing you in. I think that's an important question. Hypothetically, if you are a point guard, but the program you're going to views you as someone who's going to play off the ball more as a wing, I think that's going to naturally lead to problems, right? So I think it's about finding a fit, that someone who sees you the same way that you do and what your aspirations are. And I think the final thing is finding an AU program that will give playing time. I think this is really important in AAU. I think everyone should get playing time. Should it be equal? No. But I do think everyone has the right to at least receive playing time. So I think it's a fair and it's an honest conversation that needs to happen with whichever program you're going to, is positionally, how do they view you? And at the same time, what's their view on playing time? So I think those are the 3 important things, the 3 questions I would be asking as I'd be looking for an AU or a club program.
Yeah, I think those are all great questions. And I know I see a lot of posts online, specifically in certain Facebook groups, where they talk about the size of the team at the club level and like what is the ideal size for exactly that reason, right? People are playing AAU for the exposure. And so if you can never even get on the floor, then what does that really even matter? What team you're on specifically? And I know you mentioned the like the shoe circuit, if you want to play at that scholarship level. What advice maybe do you have, or things that somebody should consider if they're targeting more so Division 3 schools?
Yeah, so even if you want to play Division 3, I don't think it's bad to be on a shoe circuit team. Oftentimes with these, Nike, Under Armour, they have more than one level, right? So, maybe their top team, their elite team or whatever they call it is playing on, the highest brackets. Maybe they have a second team that's going to be more centered to girls that'll be Division 3 based. I think it's important to note though, for this question that Division 3 recruiting often starts at your junior or senior year, right? So I think it's important for parents to realize that if that's the route you'd like to go, it's still, AAU is still something that can be very beneficial. But I think it's important to find a team that'll give you playing time more so than the college exposure if you're just looking to go the Division 3 route, especially getting up until your senior year. So those are the things that I would be looking for, and I really think that distinction is important for parents and people involved in the game, to be aware of as they start the search.
I think the hardest part is maybe, and please let me know your thoughts on this, but sometimes, excuse me, getting parents and student athletes bought into where they might fit in at the next level. I find that that can be hard sometimes because then you think about development and how that works, but then you also know coaching, and I know certain schools that where you've put kids where in at the next level those people are generally identified a little bit earlier in their high school career. Like you said, Division 3 is a little bit later, and then you go two is a little bit earlier, and then one. And then if you think about the 1% of Division 1, it's like, I don't know, maybe they're coming out of the womb and they're thinking, yes, that's the kid.
Yeah.
This is kind of shifting towards coach, like maybe for coaches, but how can a high school coach determine what high school events are appropriate for their team?
Yeah, so I think some of that in a sense is taken care of on its own with many of the top tournaments being invite only type things. For instance, like Best of Maryland, which was one that we went to, those are typically invite only. I think the other tournaments, and there are a lot of them, will group you into, a talent level or what your roster looks like as far as how many girls are going to play in college. So I'll use the example of, we're going to the Tampa Bay Christmas Invitational. And I think there's a lot of tournaments that are grouped like this where it's okay for any team to go. And they, of course, I don't believe will turn down anyone, but I think it's important to get your team in the right division, right? So they view it as 5 tiers. The top tier being like nationally ranked teams, they're going to focus on the top 25 to 50 teams. Tier 4 is regionally ranked, right? So, within the tri state region here in Pennsylvania, Tier 3, would be considered a good high school team, oftentimes smaller divisions. And then, 2 and 1 kind of go down from there just based on the talent level and how many girls you might have playing in college. So I think a lot of these tournaments are open. But the challenge is finding the right division. And I think the best way to go about that is having an honest conversation with tournament directors about what your team is. Because, I think when you go on these trips, I don't think any girl wants to play, teams that are way above their head. But at the same time, I don't think you want to make these trips and play teams that you're significantly more talented than either. So I think it's really important when you're speaking with the director. It's about honestly describing your team so they can find the right fit for you. And that's something I've, found successful for us is having those honest conversations that'll find the right competition level for your team.
Yeah, so in your experience, the people, the directors of these tournaments who's putting the brackets together, they're pretty aware of the talent level in general. And as long as you're honest with them about what your team can do, they do a pretty good job. Is that your experience?
It is, oftentimes there's a form that you fill out there, that'll ask about girls on your team and what level they're playing in college. I typically take the next step and have a phone conversation, with the tournament directors, just so I can go that extra step and, really explain, the director can tell you about the other teams in the tournament. And at the same time, I think you can give him an accurate basis of your team. So that's something I found just to take that next step to make sure you're finding the right fit.
Yeah. And so this tournament in Florida, I'm assuming it's probably mostly East Coast teams. Is that a correct assumption? I don't know where people are traveling from, but
Yeah.
because how do you compare? I don't know. I just wonder what their process is to compare maybe a team from Pennsylvania versus Connecticut or Arizona, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. One time, it'll often start with school size. So it's enrollment, or in our case, female enrollment. Through grades 9 through 12. So it'll start with like size schools as far as size. I think the next one is question that you'll get is how many girls will be playing in college, whether they're committed or are future college basketball players. And then I think the final thing is how many returning starters you had from the previous year. So I think they use a combination of those three factors to get teams grouped into the right settings. And I'm sure there's some conversations as well, with other people who have seen them play or other, coaches or directors in the area to make sure they find the right fit.
So then when is it appropriate for a student athlete maybe to think about changing club programs?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to do is if you ask these questions, up front, hopefully you're avoiding doing this a lot. But I have, personally spoken to it and heard from coaches who really like to see girls stick with one team as much as possible, throughout their AAU career. But I do think, occasionally there can be times. I think the first thing is when playing time can become an issue, right? No matter what team you're on or how good the reputation is or how good the other girls on the team are, if you're not playing, other coaches are simply not going to get the chance to see you. And in that sense, it doesn't matter what team you're on. So I think that's one really important one is obviously playing time. And I think the second one is kind of that positional fit as well. You know, it, I think you really have to have those honest conversations. And if you're finding that, whether a coach isn't living up to what they told you, I think these are some of the rare instances that another team can be considered. But I really think the plan is if you have these honest conversations and you're finding a trustworthy organization and program, it'll hopefully prevent you from ever having to switch to a different program. Because I know that's the goal for everyone. I don't think anyone sets out to find or to play on, two or three teams over 4 years. I think ideally you stay in one program, develop a relationship with the girls and coaches, which I think is preferable for everyone.
Yeah, I just wonder sometimes how the college transfer portal, how it can influence how people might decide to transfer or change teams at the youth level. But I would totally agree with that. I think most people want to establish a relationship with somebody and continue to work with them throughout that whole process because changing is just very, very difficult. Let's move on a little bit to skill development. Based on, your experience and the student athletes that you've worked with, what skills are that you see like are needed in college, but you believe aren't really emphasized at the youth level? And youth can be anywhere from like middle school to high school.
Honestly, I believe that the biggest thing is incorporating decision making into workouts. I think this is something that's really important. It's kind of a transformation we've talked about here in our program is developing high IQ players who is especially offensively have a good feel for the game, can play without set plays, are able to learn concepts and things that'll help them in college that are not scripted. And I think that's really important. Likewise, I think that kind of blends over with finding a training system and a program that will lead towards that. I think it's finding workouts. And I know I personally kind of moved away from just the repetitive, the two ball dribbling at cones and incorporating more decision, live game based, ideally defense if you can, having someone guarding you. So I think ultimately that's what the game is, and I think there's been a transformation in training in general with this. Something we're trying to do, like I said. So I think the best thing that you can do really to get ready to play in college is develop those decision making tools, especially offensively, and having and developing a really high basketball IQ. So that's something that's going to be expected of you when you get into a college program. So the more you're doing that in middle school and leading up to high school, and hopefully playing for a high school program like that, I think the better off you'll be when college comes around.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of cones either. So happy to hear that that is also the way what your belief is as well.
Mhm.
Okay, so then kind of going off of that, if a student athlete wants to find a trainer or somebody, knowing that's your thought process of we need to develop more in-game skills, not necessarily static or very siloed skills.
Yep.
What questions can they be asking a potential trainer? Who should they be leaning on when thinking of skill development? What questions can they ask when they're thinking of, hiring a trainer or trying to work out, even on their own?
Yeah, the first question that I would certainly be asking is what their background is in the game of basketball. I think this is important. I think it's not always the case, but it certainly helps to have someone who has experience possibly playing in the game, but also working with people who have gone to the desirable level you're looking for. I think that's something that's really important, and certainly, a question that I would be asking. For example, if I am a post player, I would ideally search for someone who has experience working with other players or girls who have played in the post before. So I think it's important to find someone who has training and a background in training or playing that's on the path that you are. And I think that's really the most important thing that I'd be looking for. The other thing is, of course, how they work with girls who play Division 1 or whatever the level you're looking to go to, that they have a track record of success before. I think that's something that would make anyone feel more comfortable if you're working with someone who's shown that they have had success before in the past, have worked with girls who have played at your position, and have had a background playing at your position. Those are really the three things that I'd really be targeting when I'm looking for any skill or trainer type person to assist.
Yeah, so if you think about the girls on your high school team, how do they approach maybe skill development? And I guess what I'm trying to get to is what resources outside of a person are they using? Are they looking at videos on YouTube? Like, how do they, and how do you advise them on how to figure out what is maybe appropriate for them versus not appropriate for them in the way that they're viewing their skills training? I'm not sure if that question makes sense, but
No, it does. So I think one thing that's very important, and this is kind of getting into the college aspect of this question, is how does the next level view you? And this is something that's really important. It's gaining feedback from college coaches. And then I view it as my role to provide that information to the girl and the family. Once they have that information, I think that can kind of then shape where you're looking to go as far as training. I think this is really important. Hypothetically, if you have a girl who's committed to play a stretch four position, I think typically I take that information, I'll share it with the player and the family, and I think it's then important to find training that will work on that. If you're just hypothetically, if you're playing that position and you're going to workouts where you're practicing ball handling all the time, that's not, it doesn't hurt to do that, but that's not ultimately how that program views you or how the college level views you. So that's where I think it's important to get honest feedback, whether it be from a high school coach like myself or an AU coach who's talking to college coaches about how they view you. I think that really shapes the next step in training. That's what we try to do in our program, provide that feedback, and then that will help the family and the player make the right decision about finding the right trainer.
yeah, I think that's like a very logical progression, but I
Yep.
think not a lot of times it's lost somewhere, and that could be because there's so many videos on social media. There's so many videos of
Yep.
people just doing very specific things, and it's like, oh yeah, that looks cool, or that looks like something I want to be able to do, and then you start doing that without thinking about the end goal, like you said, of playing in college and being not only playing but just being a successful college student athlete. So I think, yeah, that's a perfect like just kind of through line, I think. And I think this leads perfectly into the recruiting process. And you mentioned this a little bit, but I love if you could go in a little bit deeper of the coaches. So like your responsibility or what you view as your responsibility versus the student athlete's responsibility in that recruiting process.
Yeah, so I think the first aspect here is I believe it's important for both to be aggressive in this process. I really support. There are a lot of girls playing AU basketball, and I think it starts with the girl being an advocate for herself. I think that's something that's really important. I view my job as the coach also to be an advocate for them, maybe more so than some high school coaches around this area or really across the country. But what I always do is I try to reach out to schools that I view would be a good potential fit for each player. And it simply gets them in the door. Maybe this school will see this and start to watch them at an AU game, or they'll come to an open gym of ours. So I view that as my role, just to provide them with opportunities. Of course, it's not going to be my decision in the end whether they're interested or going to make a scholarship, but I can at least provide a recommendation. And I view the girl also, of course, in the family has an important role in all this, because ultimately they need to be their own advocate. And one of the things, in my opinion, is developing, social media, whether that's on Twitter, now called X, I guess, developing a social media presence where you're putting out your schedule, where you have highlights from playing against good competition, whether that be statistics from high school or college, sending your schedule out via email to schools that you want. So I think it's important to work in conjunction, with your coach to market yourself in a way where people will watch you play, and hopefully that leads to opportunities over time. So I think I don't think these are separate, because I think at the same time, if you have a good relationship with your players, you're able to discuss, open and honestly about what you view as the right fit. You can provide, advice to your player about what you think is best and how to go about this process. So I think it's kind of it's a shared mission, but I certainly view it as my role to help all of our players, no matter what the level, to get them indoors as much as possible and to create some interest for them.
Yeah, you said something that I want to dig into a little bit. You said that you give recommendations based on where you think they would fit in at the next level. What are you looking at or thinking about when you're making that recommendation?
Honestly, the thing that I am looking at the most is, do I think this girl can get on the court and be an impact player at that level? That is truly how I view it, because I think there's a difference between, being able to go to a school, but also there's a huge jump to going to a school and getting on the court and being an impact player. So I think it's pretty much everyone's goal. I'm sure you would agree, to get on the court and play, right? So we're trying to I'm always trying to find schools that I think would be in that right fit, where not only could they go there, but they could also be someone who really helps the team. And I can just tell you, from most of my conversations, that's every goal's aspiration as well. It's not just to go somewhere; it's somewhere where they really feel they can be a fit, and really improve the program, and develop, and help the team win. So those are the things that I'm looking for. And I think as time goes on, this becomes easier, because you start to get feedback from schools about whether they agree with you, or whether they think a different level is correct for the student athlete. So I think initially it's kind of a little bit of your judgment call watching, and then as time goes on, I think it gets easier as schools show their interest.
Yeah, and you mentioned the last time we spoke, you mentioned something, and I'd love for you to mention it here too, and maybe talk a little bit more about it. But you said that at the end of the season, you talk to certain college coaches that you trust and ask them for feedback, and then you give that feedback to the girls on your team. Why do you decide to do that? And how do the girls take that when they hear that from you?
Yeah, I think it's important to give the girls multiple different views, not just from myself or an assistant coach, but from someone at the level that they desire to play at next. I think that's really important. I think through my conversations with girls and parents, I think in the end they appreciate the honesty, because also a lot of times you're speaking with college coaches who have been in this business 20, 30, decades before. And they have, spent a lot of time recruiting across different eras. And I think when you're providing this advice, I think parents see it, and they realize it's honest and most likely accurate from coming from people who have had a lot of success in this industry before. So it's one thing for me to say it, but when you combine that with the advice of college coaches, I think that certainly becomes something, that they take and they really put a lot of weight towards. And it also shapes our development discussion. So not only is it, a level, but it's what they need to improve at, or, what they do well. When you provide your feedback combined with coaches or schools who are recruiting them, I think it gives them a complete picture, not just from in-house, but also how they're viewed, on a national collegiate level as well.
Yeah. So let's say that I am just starting as a high school coach, and I have all intentions of helping the girls on my team through the recruiting process. What advice would you give on how to start building those relationships with college coaches?
One thing I would really do to start off with is attend practices, watch, off-season workouts, whether that be in August or in the fall. Watch practices, communicate with the coaches after. I think that's something from my experience. I've seen very few schools who will say no to that. And it's important to point out, you don't need to have a player that they're interested in to go. I think I've seen most colleges are open. If you tell them, hey, can I come watch a practice? I'm interested to see how you guys run a practice, or things I can take from them, and just have a little conversation after. I think that's a really great way to get started. Another way to do it is simply reaching out via email, or of course a third party can come in and connect you. But I'll just give a little example. I mean, this year we want to become a better rebounding team. I reached out to some of the best teams in the country as far as a rebounding percentage, and almost all of them answer and will have a legitimate conversation with you. If you want to talk to them on the phone, they will. And it's just a nice way to build a relationship with college coaches, even if you don't have players who are, maybe someone they're after at the time. I think that's still a good way to build those relationships is just to reach out, attend practices. Maybe it's have a phone call to discuss some strategy. And I found that most are willing and open to have a conversation with you. So to me, those are just some, really good ways to get in the door, even if you don't have high level players who everyone may be recruiting.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice because at the end of the day, it is a relationship business, right? And so even if you think about it from the college coaches end, it's like, why would they not? You don't want to turn your back on somebody who potentially could have a student athlete that you're interested in, but even just as another coach, people love to talk about basketball, so why wouldn't they want to? Why wouldn't they want
They
to
do.
open up and talk and share their experience? So, yeah, I would agree. I think most people, even doing this podcast, most coaches I've had previous relationships with, but even some of the guests I haven't. And I've reached out and everybody for the most part responds or is, willing to take their time because growing and building the game, we're all kind of on the same team together, right? So I think it's important
Yep.
to remember that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of touched on it. Just to wrap it up here. In general, I think if you're in this for the right reasons, you're in it to help other coaches as well. Kind of with whatever their needs are. So yes, I totally agree with your point.
Hmm. How can a high school program efficiently run their program with the recruiting calendar in mind?
So it starts with, in my opinion, in the off season, knowing what the schedule is for your players at U tournament. So one thing we'll do when our season ends, we say, at our postseason meetings, please bring in your calendar for the upcoming AAU season. And we try to form a balance between having a good off-season workout, but also having them be fresh for AAU tournaments, especially live periods. We are extremely light in July, for instance, because we know how much AAU they're playing, and we think it almost becomes counterproductive to be practicing too much to the point where they're tired to play on the weekends. So I think it's important to know your players' schedules and build your own workout off-season routine around them to the point where they are practicing in your setting, but they're also fresh to play on the weekends. So that's the first important distinction. I think another really important aspect of this is knowing how much time college coaches can spend in a high school setting compared to an AAU setting. And I know this always surprises a lot of people, but I think in total, if you count the 3 or 4 live period, there are 13 or 14 days where college coaches at the Division I level can watch a girl play. That number is astronomically higher at the high school level, whether that be coming to fall practices, whether that be attending all of our games, whether November through March. They really don't have restriction on games they can watch from that standpoint. So I think it's knowing that the high school tool is a very powerful one to showcase your players for college coaches is very important. And I think that's something that's often overlooked is how much more time they can actually spend coming to your practices and games. And it doesn't have to just be Division I, but creating a program that's open, even in a practice setting, I think is something that's really important. So, for instance, we tried to build our schedule or our open gym schedule on dates, in times where we can get college coaches to come in, whether, when we think it's a good fit. So I think it's about finding enough time to keep the girls fresh, but also having a realization of how powerful that tool is once AAU's over, that high school can be a great opportunity for all of your players to be seen as well.
Yeah, I think so. The last episode that just dropped was the head coach at a Division II school in the Philadelphia area. And he says that he goes to almost like there are certain schools where he goes to almost like every high school game, varsity, and he'll go to JV games and all of that. So, I mean, coaches are still, especially locally, I feel like coaches are going to those high school games. And I know when I was coaching Division III, there were certain schools that we would always hit up, for practices and games and things like that. So I would definitely double down on that from at least my experience and some of the conversations I've had with other coaches at different levels too. All right, so let's talk about a little bit how you specifically help your players through the recruiting process. You talked about building those relationships. I guess what are the types of conversations that you're having with college coaches? What questions are they asking you? What questions are you asking them when speaking about either what they're looking for or specific athletes on your team?
Yeah, so when college coaches talk to you, oftentimes they have seen the girl play before, So I don't necessarily know if you're providing anything earth-shattering from a talent standpoint. By the time you reach the end of July, oftentimes if it's a recruiting target of theirs, they've probably seen them play 5 times against really good competition. So I don't think, you might not necessarily be adding anything from a skills perspective. You can of course offer your opinion, but the question I get a lot is what type of person you're dealing with. So of course it starts academically. It's what kind of student they are, which is important. And then it's what type of leader are they? What type of person are they off the court? I think that's something that's hard. It can be hard to find simply from watching them play 5 to 10 times in an AU setting. So a lot of the questions I will get are, is this person a leader? Is this someone you can view leading a locker room at the college level? What type of student is she in the classroom? Will it ever be a concern for me with her conduct off the court type of questions, things like that, because I think the skill stuff is apparent, but I think it's harder to define what the person is for them. And I think that's obviously equally as important to them. As far as questions I'm asking them, I think the first thing that's really important for coaches in my position to ask is how they view them on their priority level. This is something that's really important. As they get further into their careers, I think it becomes important to know how long they have to commit. For example, if a school has offered 3 or 4 girls at the same position, is this a first come, first serve situation where the first girl commits, then everyone else in the group's offer become not committable anymore? I think that's something that's really important. That's important information to have to share with the parents and the player. Or is this more like a situation where they take 2 or 3 girls, even if someone else commits, they're still willing to have you? What's the situation like? Or is this a can't miss prospect where we will take her no matter what? Is this a first come, first serve situation? Because I think that's really important information for the family to know as you go through your decision making process. So I always try to seek that out. And then I also have those conversations about how does the program, or how does the coach view this particular player positionally, and additionally, especially if they're committed, it's what can we do to get them ready to play at that level. So I think it's about finding how they're viewed. What can we do from our perspective to get them ready for that next level? So those are just some of the questions that I have. But I think college coaches are really looking for what type of person they're getting, in my experience.
It sounds like, and I know you're very active in helping your students with the recruiting process. What are some of the questions, and this might be helpful for other parents to know too. So what are some of the questions that you're getting a lot from parents?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that I've got before is, do you think this school really views my daughter as a priority? And I think that's something that's really important. I know as a parent, I would want my son or daughter attending somewhere where they are really viewed as a priority. I think that's something that's really important. I've also, gotten the question before as how does this school recruiting view her as a prospect positionally, or what type of game will she be playing? How does she fit into their system at the next level? So I think those are important questions. And then I think there's also more targeted ones where some of the elite academic schools, it's, from the sake of academics, do you think this could be a good fit for my daughter? Or things along those lines. How does a school at an elite academic institution view the balance between basketball and schoolwork? Do you think this could be a good fit? So I think questions can be broad, and obviously they can become more specific, as you get later in the process with each individual school. But those are just kind of a sampling of some of the things that I've been asked.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And so let's say you have on your team, you have every different level of player on your team. So 1, 2, and 3, Division, NCAA. So how does your approach differ for each of those student athletes?
I don't think it differs in the sense of that we're marketing, one group more than the other, or we're reaching out more about one girl more than the other. That's certainly not the case. I think we're pretty standard about working for all of them. I think it really just gets back to the timing issue. With the Division 1, this is something I'm seeing more now. I mean, you were seeing a lot of offers go out before girls even start their sophomore year of high school.
Hmm.
And I think it's important that freshman season and even before. I mean, we have 2 players who have offers who have never played a high school game yet. So I think it's important to realize that it really does start early on that Division 1 level, especially. So it's getting, doing as much as you can to work for them, to get them in front of college coaches, to get them exposure. I just think the process isn't different in how you do it. It's about when it happens. It really starts early on the Division I side, whereas Division III, it's all the same. It's just knowing that it starts a little bit later because that, I really don't think many Division III schools are going below junior year, and based on my conversation. So it's just knowing the timeline of when to do it. But I'm pretty consistent in doing it for all of them.
Hmm. Yeah, I know. And I've actually very recently had some conversations with some Division III coaches, and they have alluded to they're starting to look a little bit earlier, but also knowing that if somebody is, I don't want to say too good because I think there's right fit, right? So like just because you can play at a certain level doesn't mean that's where you should end up. But just like they have the cognizant awareness of, okay, I know what I'm looking for potentially in this class, and it's like more of like a, oh, check mark, I'm going to watch them develop. So not necessarily throwing out offers that early, but the trend that I'm seeing with at least some of my friends is
Mm-hmm.
that they are starting to just like creep into those lower classes. But I also think that goes towards the level of Division III school it is. Like how good are they
Yeah.
regionally, nationally, that type of thing. So that's, yeah, just so many other factors. So how are you helping advise, let's say, an eighth grader or a ninth grader who has an offer from a Division I school? Like, what are those conversations with that student and their parents? What do those look like?
Yeah, so it's great to receive an offer before ninth grade. It's never a bad time to receive it ever.
Yeah.
I would argue. I mean, of course, it's wonderful, but you have to be realistic in the sense that a lot can change from the time you receive an offer, hypothetically in eighth grade compared to when you might want to make a decision level in junior year or senior before your senior year starts. So I think it's almost, I think it should give you a little confidence boost that you can play at this level and you're viewed at this level, but at the same time, not feeling comfortable and knowing a lot can change over 3 or 4 years. So in many senses, it really shouldn't affect you at all. It's nice, to have that that it's out there, but I really don't think it should affect your process about becoming a better player, still looking at elite camps or going the route of looking at other options. So it's nice. But I don't think I think it's important to not let it affect or change your preparation and wanting to become a better player at the same time. Those are really just some of the conversations I've had with those girls in that situation. Um, to view it as a blessing as it is, but at the same time, continue working, and seeking constant improvement.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that approach, especially since some of the conversations that I've had with Division I coaches is even late stage, before they sign that national letter of intent, within 3 months, something could change. And oh, that scholarship's not there anymore. Oh, we got somebody from the transfer portal. Oh, this happened. Oh, this happened. Oh, there was like, there's so many things that can change. So I definitely 100% agree with your approach of it's nice to hear, but, just keep working and keep improving. I wonder about your thoughts on even like the transition period from high school to college. How are you helping advise students making that, like, let's say that summer or that first year in college? It can be hard for a lot of people, especially as you said, they're not getting on the floor or something right away. What do those conversations look like? How are you best advising your athletes through that little period?
So again, I think this is the important part of developing a relationship with the college coach of the program that they're going to. One, I think it's important to find out, like we've talked about, is positionally getting them with workouts that'll get them ready to play. And I think, from my standpoint, a huge difference is the conditioning aspect. And we haven't really gone down the route of personal training as far as strength and conditioning, but I think it's getting the girls to understand there is a massive difference between conditioning and the off-season program as you get into the fall at any college program, not just Division I, compared to the high school level. And it's funny, we have a girl who's committed to St. Francis, who was in the NEC. She actually had her first practices over the summer. They went through their 6 or 8 week program. And the first thing she said to me was, wow, this is a lot more up and down, and the pace is considerably higher. The conditioning level, and you may think you're in great shape in high school, it's totally different for college, and it's nonstop when you're on the court. So I think the skill aspect is important, but I think this is also where the personal training aspect can come in. And I think a lot of the girls, at least that I'm familiar with, have both. There's someone they're working on the skill side, whether that be me or an outside trainer, and they also go to someone for the physical, the training, the fitness, the conditioning, the lifting that'll get them ready. Because I do not believe you can simply go through just doing skills training. I really think there has to be an emphasis on just how much bigger, faster, stronger the girls are at the next level. So I think it's really important to tie both of them together.
Yeah, the difference between an 18-year-old body and a 20, 21, 22-year-old's body
Huge.
is just like night and day. You might just get tossed around, when you're
Yeah.
training. Oh, I should not have ended on up on the floor at the baseline right here, but I just got crushed. So, yeah, and then what I would hear a lot is especially those first years. It's like I never thought like this muscle, like I'm pointing to like some obscure place on my body. This muscle hurt. Why does this? I never knew I had a muscle right there. So it's just like the soreness and being able to play and just get your body right physically. And the other thing we would always say too is the weight room doesn't lie. You can't. It takes time to build strength. You can't do it in a week. You can't cram for a test. You can't cram for the weight room. That takes time, months and sometimes years to build. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
getting the body right, 100% for sure.
I don't, you may have an opinion on this one, but from my experience playing in college, I'm not sure how many games I played over my career where you feel 100% healthy in college. It feels like oftentimes you kind of have to play through nagging little things that you didn't in high school. It's physically different. I'm sure you could probably agree on that standpoint that, that ability to fight through minor nagging things, I think is important too.
Yes, I would 100 like
Hmm.
I'm trying to think of anybody on teams that I've played on or coached who has played significant minutes and isn't injured in some way, shape, or form.
Hmm.
So I would agree with that. Just yeah, the ability to just kind of get it done and then ice and try to take care of your body the best that you can. And that's where like sleep and nutrition and all of those other factors come in too. But yeah, I would agree with that for sure.
Yep.
All right, so I have a couple last questions, but I want to give you the opportunity maybe to say, is there anything else that I didn't ask you about that you think would be important to talk about?
No, I think if I were to add one thing that we didn't touch on, it's just the usage of elite camps. I think to potentially get exposure, I think they can be good opportunities. And I think this kind of goes back to what we said about finding the right fit, going to schools that are a good fit for you, that you think a coach could potentially be interested. I think you have to be careful. If you're viewed as a lower Division 1 level player, I don't know if you're necessarily going to get anything out of attending South Carolina's league camp, hypothetically. So I think it's about finding your right fit, but I do think those are good opportunities to be seen by schools and coaches that you may desire to play for. So I think that's just another little thing to throw in there in the recruiting process as well.
Yeah, I think that's important too, because well, depending on the school, Maryland, I grew up in the Maryland area, so
Mhm.
the University of Maryland would have a big camp, and it would be like 1,000 people, right? Like so many people go to that camp, but maybe a smaller Division 1 or whatever. Like if you can figure out when those elite camps are, it's generally a lot less people, and
Yep.
so coaches can get eyes on you. And if you're invited to go to those camps, that's an even bigger plus because they want to see you, they want to bring you on campus. So yeah, I would definitely agree with that. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yep.
All right, so what Booker podcast would you recommend every high school student read or listen to, and why?
So one podcast that I have been listening to that I actually have other girls on the team have told them to listen to also is the Mind the Game podcast with LeBron James, JJ Redick. Ironically, this podcast is now defunct as JJ just became the coach of the Lakers. But the basketball knowledge and information in there was gold. And I don't think some of the conversation might be a little bit high level for, a middle school girl, high school girl, but the information they talk about, how they view the game, their experiences, talking about the history of the game. I think they do a great job talking about offensively, like some of the actions and the way the game's headed and how the modern player should be prepared to play collegiate and professional basketball. I found it to be extremely insightful. And I know, like I said, we have had girls on our team listening to that because I think it's a great way to build up basketball IQ. It doesn't matter that they're on the men's side; they have such a good understanding of the game that I think it's valuable for everyone, and it's something that I know I certainly listened to all of them before he left.
Okay, awesome. And then if you could snap your fingers and change one thing about high school or the recruiting process, what would it be and why?
One important change that I would make, and this is in conjunction, I think there are college coaches who feel the same, is I would alter the AAU schedule. I think July has become way too compact in the sense that there is essentially, you can play 20 games over the span of 7 or 8 days. And I'll use Louisville as an example because we have a lot of girls who played there at that tournament. They are there for 12 or 13 days straight. They're playing, upwards of 20 games. I think a couple things. One, by the end of it, they start to become fatigued and the quality of basketball goes down. That's, I think, the consensus opinion from college coaches as well. Two, it's hard on families for vacation time from parents to be in these places back to back for over a week, over 2 weeks sometimes. So I think the schedule, if it could be spread out more, maybe we go earlier in July and then a later one in July. But I think right now it's very compressed. And I think it's kind of leading to the quality of basketball decreasing. So I think that is, if I were a commissioner, one change I would make is just giving more time in between on July and allowing the players to be a little fresher and just giving parents more time to get from tournament to tournament. That would be my change that I would implement.
And I'm sure everybody would be happy about that.
Yeah.
Parents especially.
Yeah.
All right, last but not least, any final words of wisdom?
No, I think ultimately if you go about this process the correct way, the right level will find you. That is truly the advice I would give. If you are aggressive in the right ways, reaching out to the right schools, playing for the right AU program, who's honest with you about the things we talked about, doing your part to reach out to colleges in conjunction with a coach, whether it be at AU or high school like myself, eventually you will find the right level, and in turn they will find you. So I think it's about believing in this process, and there will be ups and downs throughout, but finding the right fit and someone who wants you is really so important. And I think if you do some of the steps we've talked about, ultimately you will get there.
Yeah, I think if people were to just take one thing out of this episode, I think it would be those like questions that you talked about at the beginning when talking to AAU coaches, because doing your work early will help a lot of the other things down the road. And I don't know how intentional parents and student athletes are when they go looking for an AAU program. And I would think that part of that hesitancy to be bold or to ask questions is because maybe they just don't know. And they think
Yep.
that a coach, oh, that this person is coaching here, they know and they understand. And I think all coaches and all people are doing the best with what they know, but asking those questions is super important because nobody, in my opinion, nobody's going to be as invested in that process as parents and the actual people going through it.
Yes, I think to summarize, early education can prevent a lot of headaches along the way, and I,
Yeah.
I think that would be the good takeaway.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, Steve, I really appreciate your time and you being here.
Cool. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you aren't already, I would highly recommend subscribing to the podcast so you can get updated once new episodes are dropped. If you're a fan of the show, go ahead and leave a review. It really helps spread the word to more athletes, parents, and coaches. Now, if you have any questions for myself or future guests, feedback, or you're curious on how we can work together to help you reach your basketball goals, let's have a conversation. Feel free to email me at l@hoopsthroughlife.com today to set that up. That's EL@HOOPSTHROUGHLIFE.com. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.